Okay, so welcome to episode number 5 of our Scale-up Marketing Roundtables. This is a session focused on finding and hiring the best fit agency to help you as you grow your scale-up. So we'll go straight into the housekeeping. We're aiming for about 30 to 45 minutes, starting with 15 minutes of presentation. This is the 5th in the series, and it's my turn to do the talking rather than the other gents that we've had, the other experts have had on this series. So I'll talk for about 15 minutes, and then we'll go into roundtable discussions. So if you've got questions, feel free to hold them till the end or pipe up as we go through the presentation as well. You'll notice that we are recording the session, so if you're happy to be seen in the recording, please keep your camera on. And if you're not happy to be seen in the recording, please turn your camera off. And whilst you're not asking questions, it would be great if you would put your mic on mute so we haven't got too much background noise. And last but not least, the sessions are brought to you by Agency Squared, Ed Davidson Marketing, Growth Division, and ISL Talent. So as I said, we've had 4 roundtables already, starting with a look at what marketing is for scale-ups, what the different types of marketing are, how much does it cost, what's the ROI, how do you measure the effectiveness of your marketing. The last session, we looked at hiring and building a marketing team. And last but not least, we're talking about how do you augment your marketing team with a marketing agency that can really support you in delivering your objectives. So we have recorded all the sessions, and you can see them. There's the bit.ly link there. So bit.ly/scale-up roundtables will take you to all the videos on YouTube, so you can catch up if you've missed any of those previous sessions. And this session will be available there next week. So I'll briefly introduce myself in a moment, and then we'll go into the meat of the session, which is how do you find and hire the right agency. We'll be looking at the different types of agencies, how you manage that procurement process, the balance between agency and hiring in-house, and of course some telltale signs, things to look for agencies that are going to be a great fit for you. So introduction wise, my name's Andy Bargery and I run Agency Squared, and I'm a marketeer by trade. I've been in marketing since 1998, and I now act primarily as a consultant and a marketing tutor and an advisor. I help agencies to be better at being agencies, and I help to teach marketeers how to be better marketers. So you can see a few logos on the right-hand side there of brands that I've been working with recently, running education and teaching programs from Vodafone, Sky Bet, Halfords and Centrica, for example, and then some of the other brands that are clients that I've worked with over quite a long career in marketing. And many of those look really big, but I've got lots of experience with the big brands, but also smaller and some startup companies as well. I'm also currently a non-exec director for a startup e-commerce business that is involved in the kids fashion space. So that's me in a nutshell. Let's look at agencies, because that's what we're here to cover today. And I think it's fair to say that not all agencies are created equally. If we look at the agency landscape in the UK, I don't know where this figure comes from, but I'm regularly told there are about or over 20,000 agencies in the UK. So that's quite a big market to shop in if you're looking to buy some agency services. How do you find the right one for you? When's the right time to hire them? Are they going to be any good? And I often say when you look at the agency landscape, it's a bit of a custard soup because they all say the same things about their agency. And it makes it really hard as the buyer of an agency services to know what to look for, to know how to hire the right agency. So how do you find the right agency for you? And what's the starting point? And I think from my perspective, it all starts with you, a bit of introspection, looking inwards. So I think the first step in any agency recruitment process is not hitting Google and saying digital marketing agency London or wherever it is you're based. It's actually to make sure that you've got a good understanding of what your marketing plan is in the first place. And a marketing plan then has really, if we distill it down to 3 simple steps, we have a diagnosis, we have strategy, and we have tactics. So let's have a little bit of a look at what that means. So the diagnosis, the first part of your marketing plan, is really the kernel of your idea. It's that very golden nugget, that gem you've uncovered that you think is a product that there is demand for. Now, if you're in the startup and the scale-up phase of growth, then there's probably a good chance you've been working very hard on your product market fit. And it's one of the things we've talked about throughout the Scale-up Marketing Roundtables is making sure that you've got a good product market fit. So what we're looking for here in a marketing plan is, what does the customer think about? What does the customer care about when they're trying to find a solution for their problem? We're trying to overcome a challenge, because that's really what we're looking for here, is to understand our customer and how do we put together a proposition that's going to relate to them, that they're going to understand, that's going to make them want to part with their money. Also, I think with that diagnosis, we need to look internally at our own resources, our strengths and weaknesses. How much money have we got available for marketing, for example? What skills have we got in the team that will enable us to deliver effective marketing programs? And then, of course, what are our objectives? Where do we want to get to? So that diagnosis phase of marketing planning is very much, where are we now and where do we want to get to? So we've got to do the diagnosis first. And I think that quite often in marketing planning, that's the process, or that's the piece of the puzzle that doesn't get delivered effectively. But once we've mapped out where we are now and where we want to get to, we've got a set of objectives, then we go into strategic thinking or strategy. And strategy is one of those terms that I think lots of people misunderstand or overuse. But really what we're talking about with strategy is, how are we going to achieve our objectives? How are we going to corral our resources in a way that's going to enable us to achieve our objectives? And we want to have a number of strategic options to think about before we choose the final version we're going to go for. And then we get on to tactics, marketing tactics. This is what we're actually going to do. This is the execution end of the marketing planning process. So what are we going to do? Who's going to do it? And how are we going to measure whether it works? So we've gone from a bit of navel gazing, some diagnosis, to producing strategy, to doing the marketing work. And I think the challenge for lots of early stage organizations, scale-up startups, is we jump straight into tactics. We go straight to our bullseye framework and doing some of that tactical work, whether it's email marketing, social, Facebook ads, whatever that looks like. So you can see there's kind of three distinct pieces of work that goes into a marketing plan. And I've really simplified that, I've distilled it down. But if we think about where agencies can support you in that process, from that diagnosis to the tactics, then we want to think about, where can we plug them in? So if we look on the left-hand side, we've got the diagnosis. This really needs to be led by you, the in-house team, you as the founder, the chief growth officer, whatever your title is. You need to really understand your product market fit. You need to understand your audience. You need to be defining what it is you're doing to solve your customers' challenges. And that really is best done by yourselves, because you're closest to the product, closest to the market at this stage of the planning process. Now, of course, if you're a big brand, you've got lots of money, you might have a market research or an insights team internally, or you might outsource that to a research agency to help you with that formulation, that early stage audit. But I think in reality, for a startup or a scale-up organization, most of that work needs to be done in-house. So once we know what we're trying to achieve, then we move into that strategy, that strategic planning process. What are our options available to us for reaching our objectives? And this is where we start to see the kind of blurring of the lines between what we do in-house and what our agency delivers for us. And it's likely that you could hire some specialist consultancy to help you to formulate your strategy. That could be a non-exec director, for example, or it could be a consultancy that is able to guide you on, well, what's the right way to reach your objectives? And then, of course, we get to the far right-hand side, the tactics. And that's where it's the actual execution end of the plan. So how are we going to put together the content and distribute it and measure whether it's worked? How do we build an SEO program? What does PR look like? How do I run my Google or my social advertising? How do I make sure that works? And this, for me, is really where you get into those specialist disciplines. And this is where an agency can really add a lot of thinking and a lot of value to your marketing programs. One of the things that we talked about in an earlier session when we talked about hiring people was this idea of having a T-shaped marketer. And T-shaped marketers looks a bit like this. So you have those generalist elements of marketing expertise across the top, and then we drill down in expertise into one particular area. So this T-shaped marketer has a good understanding across the piece, but at the same time is an expert in paid media. And I think it's where you look at these T-shaped marketers and you have these gaps, let's say in paid media. If we go back, we can see that that might be where you plug in your agencies to deliver some of that tactical thinking. So my feeling is for scale-ups and startups is you need agencies, but maybe at the early stages of growth to be really focused on getting them to do particular tactics, particular activities or executions that are going to help you move towards achieving your objectives. And those T-shaped marketers, those generalists are what you have in the team to help you understand, well, how do those pieces fit together with your overall marketing plan? So what does good strategy look like? I think strategy is one of those terms that's often overlooked, and I think not necessarily overlooked, but misunderstood. But I like this definition of strategy from Richard Rummelt, who wrote a book called Good Strategy, Bad Strategy, which is really the gold standard in terms of strategic thinking, at least in my opinion. So good strategy has coherence, coordinating actions, policies, and resources so as to accomplish an important end. And I think that's a relevant message. You know, let's make sure that when we're building out our marketing plans, that we have coherence. It's clear for everyone, what are we trying to achieve, whether that's our in-house, our internal teams, or whether it's the agencies that we bring in to support us in the delivery of our marketing campaigns. That is the shortest talk on strategy you're ever going to hear. And I haven't got time to go into it in any detail because today we're talking about agencies and hiring agencies. So let's talk about the different types of agencies that you might be able to engage. So on the left-hand side of this column, you can see we've got different types, starting with the big holding company agencies. So you may have heard of brands like Omnicom or WPP or Dentsu or Publicis. These are large holding groups that own lots of different agencies, and they typically work with clients that have very big budgets, deep pockets, big brand campaigns, that sort of stuff. These are going to be very expensive, and you might find as a startup or a scale-up, particularly if you haven't got any funding, that you wouldn't qualify into their sales pipeline. They wouldn't want to work with you. So if we move down the types, we've got independent agencies, and these are smaller teams owned and operated by the same people. And there are lots and lots of these operating in all different functions. And this is really where you want to be looking. Independent agencies that have a similar kind of size, profile, positioning to you as an organization. You want to be working for an agency where you're not the biggest and you're not the smallest client. So look for agencies that are independent in that space. Then we have network agencies. These are agencies that are independently owned but work together. We see that quite often in the world of public relations, where you might hire an agency in the UK who's part of a bigger network, and they can plug you into agencies within that network in different geographies. So if you're looking to grow internationally, working with a network agency is a good way of managing those relationships with multiple trusted agencies. And last but not least is a virtual agency, or often termed, I suppose, a collection of freelancers or consultants that regularly work together. And they're quite flexible, they're quite malleable. You can find different types of specialists to work together as teams. And that became popular, I suppose, over the last decade or so. So they're the typical types of agencies you might find. And then, of course, function-wise, what do they do? Well, there's lots of different ways in which agencies organize themselves. It might be around the kind of consultancy that they offer, or the specific service they have, like media planning and buying, for example. It could be that you need the services of a creative agency, whether that's creating brand, delivering advertising campaigns, for example. Or maybe you need a team that can deliver marketing communications and events, or digital marketing or public relations, for example. And digital marketing can cover all manner of services, from search marketing, paid and organic search marketing, to Facebook, social media, to content marketing, everything in between. And I think from my perspective, I've worked for a long time in agencies. And one of the things that I've seen lots of agencies do is they've called themselves a full service agency. And what that means is they're trying to offer a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And I think what you need as a startup or a scale-up is not necessarily a full service agency, but you want to find agencies that are really good at what they do. So I don't want a full service agency. I want someone that's really good at SEO, and I'm going to plug them into my team to fill that gap. Or I want a PR agency that really knows the influencers and the press in the space that I'm trying to reach, and I'm going to plug that into my team. So be wary of those agencies that brand themselves full service, because nobody's good at everything. So be careful. Find those agencies that are specialists in the areas in which you need some assistance to execute your marketing plan. So now we know we need an agency. How do we manage that process of actually recruiting an agency? Well, obviously I've said start off with a marketing plan. So do your diagnosis and your strategy, map out some tactics. That's step one. Step two is then to feed all that into a really clear brief. And I've got a next slide is just a couple of points on what goes into a good brief. But it's consistently one of the areas that most agencies feel their clients fail at, is providing them with a good brief. And the good brief really tells your agency what it is you need them to deliver for you. Third step is to create a shortlist of agencies. Yep, you can hit Google and type digital marketing agency. Better actually to talk to your friends, family, colleagues and say, who have you worked with? Who's delivered for you? Who understands our market, and get some recommendations. However you find that shortlist, 3, 4, absolute maximum 5 agencies should be on that shortlist who you should be talking to. The ideal number from my perspective is 3, because then you'll get 3 different perspectives, 3 different quotes, and you won't be spending an awful lot of time in an overly over-egged competitive pitching process. So run your pitch process. And what you're looking for there is not necessarily creative ideas for what the solution to your challenge is, but you want to understand how those agencies will address how to overcome your challenge. How would they work with you? Who's the team? How am I going to get on with these people? Simplified that, of course, but we're pressed for time today. So then, of course, select your agency, negotiate with them, make sure you've got a good understanding as to what's going to be delivered. So the piece to think about here is when you issue your brief, what the agency is going to come back to you is with the scope of work. And the scope of work tells you exactly what's going to be done by who and when, and of course, what it's going to cost you. So make sure you really understand those documents. Does the scope of work actually match what you need and what's in your brief? And then once you've got the scope of work and the brief tied up, put it in place with a good contract and a service level agreement that protects you and the agency. And that's the basis of a really good, healthy client and agency relationship. You need those documents, a clear brief, a good scope of work, and a proper contract in place. So talking of briefing, here's 12 points you should put into a brief. I'm not going to read them all out to you because that will take a little while, but I want to just pick out one particular point of the briefing process, and that's the budget. One of the things that I've seen brand side marketers do badly over the years is to hide their budget as part of that pitching process or that engagement with the agencies. It's really important that you share that budget just to save a lot of time and to make sure that any proposals that you receive are actually aligned with reality. It's okay if you've got 500 quid a month or £10,000 a month or £50,000 a month. Be transparent with that, and that will help you to identify the right agencies and save you wasting an awful lot of time. If that's your budget, the one concern I hear from clients is, well, if I tell them what my budget is, they're just going to spend it. Well, yeah, that's right. You want them to spend it because that's how you're going to achieve your marketing objectives, right? So don't hide your budget. Be transparent with it. It will really help you as you engage with your potential agencies. Okay, so we're running a little bit short on time, so I'm just going to wrap it up then with some things to look for when you're trying to find a good agency. First one is an established team. Do they have the skills and the experience you need to hit your objectives? Have they been around for a while? Do they work well together? Have they got some client references? The second piece is, did they have a well-structured approach to how they handled their pitch or how they engaged with you in that sales process? How many questions did they ask you? Did they really interrogate the brief to understand exactly what it is you're looking for? I think good agencies ask a lot of questions. And when you think they've asked them all, they haven't. They've got more questions. And that's how they're going to really understand what it is you need to deliver. If an agency turns up to pitch to you and they haven't asked you any questions, I promise you they don't understand your brief. So they're probably not the right agency for you. So that's step 3. Do they really understand the brief? Have they spent the time to get under the skin? Do they understand your business and your unique challenges? Have they got some creds in your sector or related sectors? References, bit of a no-brainer, isn't it? You know, what other small startup high growth brands have they worked with? Are they able to deliver on lean budgets, or do they always work with big brands where budget's no object? That will determine how well they can work with a small scale-up growth brand. And then lastly here is chemistry with the delivery team. So what you've often find with agencies is they'll put their best team forward to pitch you and to win your work, and then they'll roll out the execution team afterwards. You don't want that. You don't need that. You want to talk to the people that you're going to be working with if you appoint that agency, and you want them involved from day one of that process. So that's really important. How are you going to get on with these people? Because you're going to be working with them quite a lot if you appoint them for any part of your business. So you want to know that you can get on with them. You know, like, and trust them. They're going to fit with your culture and your ethos within your startup or your scale-up brand. Okay, so a whistle-stop tour of how to pick out an agency. I hope that's been useful. It's a really interesting space working with agencies, and I think that if you get it right, it can really make a difference to you in achieving your marketing objectives. But I'm really happy now to take any questions, and we can perhaps have a discussion around, you know, how you get on with finding agencies. Is this part of your world? Do you need to recruit some agencies? Yeah, I'll open it up to the table for some questions.
Thanks, Andy. That was great. I've got a kind of specific question around kind of industry sector. Do you kind of recommend that when you're working with an agency that they have previous experience to kind of specialize in a particular sector in terms of the sector that you work in, or does it not make much difference and it's just as easy that they have a kind of broad view?
Yeah, I've had this conversation with brands a few times actually, and some people really value, you know, if you're in financial services, I want to find somebody else that's been in financial services, for example. And I think there's real value in that because it cuts down the learning time. The agency will be able to very quickly understand the space in which you're operating. But I had a good perspective on this from a brand recently, and they felt that as long as they've been in a similar environment, so if they are in a regulated environment, let's say financial services, but the agency's experience is in another regulated environment, let's say healthcare or pharma, for example, then that's a similar discipline, a similar skill set. So they'd be quite happy with that. I think for me, if I was hiring an agency, I'd want to see somebody that has done some work in my space, in my sector.
Yeah, makes sense. And the regulatory element of it is certainly impactful in terms of the agency understanding how that works. And
yeah, exactly.
Knowing to go through FinProm and all that. Yeah.
Yeah, you don't want to be paying that agency to learn how to work in your space. You want an agency that's already learned how to work in your space. It's particularly if you need to be really lean with your budgets. You know, don't hire someone that doesn't know how the sector works.
Interesting. I tend to agree. I suppose on the flip side of it, sometimes if you have an agency that's only worked in one particular area, they might roll out the same pattern in terms of their thought process or creativity. And I suppose the argument is if you can bring somebody else, say from a B2B or B2C that sees things in a slightly different angle, then maybe they'll bring some creativity to it. But I'm being a bit of a devil's advocate there. I think it's good to make sure they do have experience because they understand it. They know who the ICP is or have a better understanding who the customers are, so they can then answer the brief and be able to resonate based on what the product or service delivers to the ICP. But
yeah, that's a really good point actually, Ed, isn't it? Is, you know, sometimes it pays to have a fresh perspective, you know, a new set of eyes looking at a problem, and you don't want an agency that's rolled out the same solution for 10 clients in your space trying to do the same thing. So, you know, there is a danger that might happen. It's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's some like super useful insights into that. So thank you. I think the bit that made me smile and that I really was like, yes, absolutely agree with that, is the bit around the budget and being open with the budget, and then being like, yes, you know, that is what you want to spend. Like if they're going to spend all of it, that's your budget. That's the point in a budget, is that, you know, it's there to be spent to maximize the budget to get the best results out of it. I think, you know, I run Growth Vision as a kind of distributed agency, and it's something that I come up with a lot where, you know, people are trying to be a bit coy around budget bits, and they always kind of they're never forthcoming with it. And I think that is an important part in when you're looking to engage an agency, is like, what actually is your budget, what are you insourcing and what are you outsourcing, and what does that budget look like? And being open from the get-go, I found has much better conversations that result in better outcomes as well, where everyone's just on the same page. So I mean, there's not really a question in this. I just think it is a massively important part of the whole kind of picking an agency process, and making sure that everyone's aligned and on the same page, really.
Yeah, I agree. It sounds like we're in violent agreement here, Tristan. That's true. And I think that if I look at the difference between a big brand, let's, for sake of argument, say Coca-Cola, they have their budget, their team's going to want to spend that budget, versus a small brand that's owner managed. And that, in the perspective of that smaller brand, is, well, the budget's there, but it's actually my personal money I'm spending. That skews how you think about the budget, because it's, well, I could hire the agency to do that bit of work, or maybe we should have a summer holiday this year because the kids have had a tough time at school, or whatever that mindset is. And if you're going into that kind of scaling high growth, you need to be in the mindset that this isn't my personal money as the founder, this is the business's money, and we need to spend it to achieve our objectives. And that's the mindset shift there. It's gone from, this is my money, it's my budget, to this is the budget for the business that it needs to support its growth objectives. And I think from an agency point of view, when you're talking to prospective clients, it's useful to try and get a handle on that. Because if the founder or whoever you're talking to at your scale up is still of the mindset that it's his or her money, then that's where you're going to have some challenge there, because they will want to try and save money where possible. And of course, that's not always consistent with effective marketing. Sometimes you've got to spend. And it always makes me laugh when you look at Google Ads, for example. Anyone running Google Ads will know that Google always makes recommendations for how you can improve your ads. And one of the recommendations is always increase your budget. Oh, really? Yeah. There's a surprise. But it's true, you've got to spend to learn. And part of what I really enjoyed in the earlier roundtables was looking at that bullseye framework and thinking, I actually have to allocate a certain amount of time to test some of these tactics out and see what works. And that's going to involve some money. So get used to it.
Yeah. And I did actually have a question. So, I think it was like your last point on the final slide, which is about like kind of being sold to through, someone who's a director or higher up in the business, and then kind of like having juniors executing, or the delivery team, being, far less experienced than the person you were actually sold into. And I think another problem that happens on top of this as well is when, a lot of the marketing agencies have a great sales process, and they have a great pitching process, and they can, present everything in an amazing looking proposal. And from the outset, it all looks really good. But like, do you have any kind of hints and tips as to how to kind of dig beneath that kind of surface level initial conversations you've had, and really kind of find out whether this agency has actually, the experience that you need, and they're not just talking the talk? How do you know that they can actually walk the walk? And I suppose there's case studies and things, but I'd be interested to hear kind of, your way of actually seeing through some of that sometimes.
Yeah, I think every agency is going to come to you with their credentials, their creds deck, I suppose is the term that you'll use in agency land. And that gives you a flavor for what they've been up to. Just be wary of the creds deck. That could be pulled together from all sorts of different people's past experiences. You want to know what the actual delivery team has done. And ideally, you want to speak to some of those clients as well. That might come a little bit later in the process, or it might come as a reference check before you get someone in to do a pitch to you. But I think the point about speaking to the pitch team versus the delivery team is, a really good, growing, successful agency will have a really good pitch team. And that's not to say that they won't have a good execution team as well. So make sure that as part of that process, when you run the pitches, you make it really clear you expect to see the team that will be delivering the work, and not the team that can deliver a brilliant presentation. So there's, I think, the two things there is make sure it's clear in the pitch process that you want to see the delivery team. And secondly, make sure you look beyond the creds deck and actually speak to one or two customers and find out what it was like working with that agency.
Yeah, nice. Makes sense. Thanks, Andy.
Perfect.
So hopefully you've made the right, decision. You found out the right agency in terms of, contracts and kind of break clauses, or even like, you know, bringing on particular areas of the agency to start off with and then expanding into others. Is there any kind of recommendations there in terms of, I suppose, damage limitation, but also, you know, making sure that your validation process is worked out and you've got an ongoing growth relationship with that agency, but if it turns sour, you can move on to something else afterwards?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the things that agencies will always try and do is tie you into a minimum commitment. It often will be 6 months, more often 12 months. But of course, as a startup, you know, you don't want to tie yourself to a 12-month retainer, not knowing whether that tactic is going to work for you. So if we go back to the bullseye framework, and you chaps can perhaps add some to this, you know, I think you want a 3-month test period in any particular tactic to see whether it works. So you don't really want to be tying yourself into a commitment for any longer than 3 months for a particular type of work. So in an ideal world, you want to contract an agency based on a particular discrete campaign or piece of work. And if you need ongoing work delivered, get an agency signed up to a master services agreement that gives you that flexibility. And then within that master services agreement, hire them for individual projects that are covered under that agreement. And that, I think, gives you a really good way of managing your relationship with those particular agencies. Just be mindful, you know, I've seen it lots of times where agencies will pitch, we can do your PPC, the minimum term is 12 months, it will cost you X per month. You know, 12 months is too long for a startup or a scale-up. You know, you need to know much sooner timeframe whether that particular tactic is going to work, particularly if you're following the bullseye framework methodology. So yeah, be mindful. Long tie-ins to agencies is not the right way to go for a scale-up. Cool,
makes sense. I suppose the last one for me, which you know, I'm a marketing consultant rather than an agency. that view of it was quite interesting, that sliding scale around kind of strategic and tactical. Where you kind of think, I suppose, from a scale-up perspective, where it's useful to have a, you know, strategic guidance and working with an existing team as kind of, you know, individual consultants, as opposed to when you then make the allocation to say, I've got senior people in place that can do that for me, and then I'll use an agency to deliver tactically. Just interesting to know if you think there's kind of step changes with an organization in terms of how they've grown, where they need that level of assistance.
Yeah, I think there is, you know, early stage when we're talking about diagnosis and strategy formulation, that's where, Ed, you probably earn your money, because you can go in there and you can see the challenge a brand's got, you can help them formulate their strategy, but you're probably not going to be there wanting to do any SEO or, you know, running Facebook ads campaign. I don't know, maybe you are. No, yeah, I suspect not. I suspect, you know, that strategic piece there is you're probably in with a brand or a startup for 12 months, couple of years, and then helping them to shift over to hiring an in-house CMO, marketing director. And then, you know, I think the job of a good consultant is to do yourself out of a job, right? You've helped them to evolve to a point where they don't need you anymore. And that's, I always feel when I've done that I've done my work. You know, but those tactical execution focused agencies doing the PPC or whatever, you know, they could be around for a while. And most likely, as a scale-up, you never want to bring those things in-house, because you want someone that's a specialist. You know, if you look at Google Ads, for example, it's a platform that changes quite a lot. You want someone that is in that space day in, day out to make sure you get the best out of it as a channel. So I'd always try and keep those external to the business.
I suppose what's interesting at the moment in terms of skill shortages, especially with you know, kind of in-house teams, is when you call upon agencies to do particular pieces of work, which you can, you know, use and kind of test, and then, you know, potentially if it works out, double down on those particular channels and bring people in-house. Obviously, as we're recording this in like May 2022, you know, you've got potential recession, and that might change. But at the moment, in terms of what I'm seeing and what kind of Alan spoke about before, is that kind of skill shortages, where it is difficult to put in-house, and you need some level of tactical agencies to be able to deliver on things. So yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point. The skill shortage is challenging right now, and in marketing. And you know, you see this kind of every couple of years, you see a big trend for brands saying, well, we're going to do all of our marketing in-house ourselves. And they go through this period where they're trying to create their own in-house marketing agencies, and then they realize actually this is not an easy business. and then it starts to go the other way again. Everything gets outsourced. And I've seen this kind of fluctuation lots of times in my time in marketing. I was just reading this morning, actually, I mean, I know that Coca-Cola is not a relatable brand for any scale up really, but I've seen that they've been trying to introduce their own internal marketing function or agency for some time and not doing very well with that. So, you know, there is definitely a time and a place for external marketing suppliers. I would also say that because I love agency. I've been in that world for a long time, so I'm a little bit biased. But I do think, you know, getting that balance right between agency and in-house expertise. You know, in-house expertise for me should be the generalists, the marketing managers, the strategists, with support from expert consultants like you, Ed, and others. And the very detailed execution, get it out to an expert that does it day in, day out, and that's what they do. And that's where I think you'll get the results. Okay, I think that's about 45 minutes. That's what we promised it would be, about 45 minutes. So let's call it a day there. Thank you very much, everyone, for coming along to today's roundtable. I hope you found it useful, and I hope that you found the whole series of the Scale-up Marketing Roundtables useful and valuable. We would love to hear your thoughts and feedback, so do let us know. Drop us an email or drop a note on the video in and YouTube. And if you like it, we'll do more. If you didn't like it, then sorry about that. We'll try harder next time. Thanks, everyone, for coming along.